because probably they suffer the most. But the hints we will be talking about, to be honest, they help, they make the life of every person easier, because as you will see, these are quite easy things that are related to organizing proper work, to preparing the place of our work, to prepare the materials in a way that are just easy to understand, to perceive. So let's start with the dyslexics. So there are some hints, quite easy things that can be done. And these hints are related when we prepare different types of documents and presentations. For example, PowerPoint presentation as this one. And documents, I mean here different documents, some legal documents, but mainly materials that we prepare for our students. Even if we don't know if we have a dyslexic person in the group, it is quite wise to use the hints because it just makes the perception of every person better. And if we talking now, I also don't know if any of you suffers from these problems, but it is just safer and better to be prepared for such a situation. So what can be done? We know that dyslexic people, they suffer from many things. They have reading and writing problems, so problems with reading and writing. And because many research was done on dyslexic people, there are also quite a lot of recommendations that have been drawn up to help them perceive information better. And there are some easy hints that can be used and really will make the life of dyslexics better. I will prove it a bit later, because at the very end of our presentation, of our meeting, as I said, I am going to tell you about my eye tracking research, and it really proves that it is true what I am going to say now. So the very first thing we should remember about, and we can do, is to use large spaces between words. So spacing is important, and we should display the words in an appropriate font. For some reason, in many documents that we prepare on our computers in Word program, we automatically use Times New Roman font, but it turns out that this one, Times New Roman, is not the best for dyslexic people. Definitely better and the best for them are such fonts like Arial and Comic Sans MS, because they ensure good legibility of the text, and the structure of letters written in these fonts is just easier to perceive by dyslexic people. So for those who do not suffer from dyslexia, probably there is no difference, but for them, definitely Arial and Comic Sans are advisable. It's a text that will be read by people. So the text that is intended for reading should not be printed densely. So that is the thing that we should remember. Don't print the text densely. I skipped one thing, so let's go back to that. We should not present the text in one big block. It is important to use illustrations just to separate some parts of the text and to break the text up with illustrations. But of course, you have to be careful when talking about illustrations and dyslexics, because the illustrations should be somehow related to the content of the text, because dyslexic people pay attention to that. And although they do not make real existing links between the illustration and the text, definitely it is better if the illustration is somehow related to a text and it's not only a distractor. Don't use capital letters in titles and in the text. Capital letters should be avoided, because if the words are written in capital letters, the words run into each other because they start and end at the same height. And it is quite complicated for dyslexic people just to separate proper words. So it's better not to use capital letters. When we make our presentation slides or just materials, we should remember that we shouldn't use unnecessary words. So make your sentences as short as possible, as full of content as possible, with no unnecessary words. It is also advised to use bullet points instead of sentences, to use charts, diagrams, and colored background. If you have a look at my presentation, you will notice that the background of it is not white. We are used to white background and black letters, but then the contrast occurs. And although we are used to black and white, for our eyes, it is not that better. So in case of dyslexic people, it is advised to use colored background. And in a second, I will tell you which colors are the best. And as you can see, my background is kind of gray, so the contrast is just a bit different. Coming back to this contrast problem, we should choose the colors of materials in a proper way. So it is advised that the color of our background, of our paper, should be cream or a natural shade of white, but not snow white. So for example, gray is quite okay, but snow white would not be advisable. It can be matte. And if we print our materials on a paper, we should be careful as not to use bad paper. So the paper should be thick enough as not to make the printing from the opposite side of the paper just go through it, because it is a kind of distractor for a person with dyslexia. We shouldn't put the light text on a darker background because it makes the contrast better, bigger, and it is more complicated for a dyslexic person to read. And the text should not be surrounded by complicated graphic elements. So of course, we should use charts, diagrams, graphs, but the graphic element should not be too complicated and should not be too close to the text, because then they act as distractors. Why is it important? Because dyslexic people learn visually and they absorb material without finding links in it. They absorb material on a random basis. And of course, in theory, we know now that we should pay attention to the color of the paper, we should pay attention to the font, we should pay attention to the size of letters, to the type of letters. But if you open any school book, for example, you will see a lot of bad examples. And I would like you to see one of the bad examples that I chose. And from my point of view, it shows quite a lot of things that shouldn't be done. This is the example of the textbook of English that I used to use with my students. And that is one that made me ask some questions. As you can see, there is the title given, Matura Prime Time. So this is the textbook prepared for students of secondary schools in Poland. And if you just have a quick look, it may seem to be attractive, because it is. It is colorful. Pictures are probably interesting. The material is placed in different parts of the pages. So at the very first sight, it may make impression that everything is okay. But on the basis of the information that we have now, if we have a closer look at that, we will notice that it's not really good for people with dyslexia. So the majority of the material is on the creamy, a bit yellow color, and that is okay because the contrast between black letters and that background is not bad. But if you count the number of colors that are used on this page, then this number is quite big, because we have all types of colors: blue, black, red, yellow, green, and some more. But the most terrifying thing happens in the area of the text. So first of all, there is the text, which is written in white letters, I mean the main part of the main body of the text, on colorful background. So in some part of it, it is dark blue background, but it is also dark background and white letters on it. So the contrast between that is really enormous. What is more, the text is placed not parallel. I mean, it is not as in a normal book, it is a bit turned, and that also becomes a bit problematic. There is another thing. There are some pictures, but the pictures are placed in the text, which means that some sentences must be written in a shorter way, and some sentences are longer, just to give the place to the picture. And that is also a kind of a distractor when talking about dyslexic people. If you have a look at the third text, so the one with the lady with umbrella, you will see some boxes there, and the frogs and the hand of the lady. And these things, these graphic elements, they are placed quite close to the text that is to be read by students. And because the pictures and the graphic elements are so close to the text, while reading that text, the students, the dyslexic ones, will skip to these graphic elements. So for some short time, they will stop reading the text and look at the text, because, at the graphic elements, because the graphic elements somehow are too close to the text. And for dyslexics, it is impossible not to change the place that they look at. And in their case, changing the place of looking is a kind of distractor. So it is not a helpful thing. And definitely in our materials, in our presentations, we should definitely avoid contrast, as in here, and we should use pictures and illustrations, but do not put them in the text area in a way it is done in this material. When talking about our behavior towards dyslexia students at school, at university, so when we run classes with dyslexics, we should remember about some quite useful hints. First of all, we can't criticize them, but we should praise them instead. Well, dyslexic people are the ones who have always been criticized from their very beginning at school because of bad writing, because of bad reading, because of not proper completing the tasks. So they are criticized all the time. Let's try to praise them instead, to tell them that they did something well. So for us as teachers, it shouldn't be the most important that the text is nicely written, but the content should be the most important. If the content is okay, why not to tell them that it was well done? That will help to increase, to provide their self-confidence, to give them the opportunity to see their success and to stop concentrating only on their deficits and problems. Because dyslexic people have problems with reading, they may have problems with pronunciating the words. It's wise not to ask them to read aloud. If we want somebody to read the text, let's choose the person not suffering from dyslexia. In case of dyslexic people, we should never use the word lazy. So we shouldn't call them lazy people. We shouldn't call the way of completing some tasks as the lazy way of completing them, because it is not really like that. People with dyslexia have to work much harder to produce a really small amount of paper, of homework. So the effort to achieve the same result is definitely bigger in comparison to people not suffering from dyslexia. So calling them lazy is just unfair. We should also expect less written work from them, because writing is a problematic thing. A person with dyslexia may be verbally bright, but may have problems to put their ideas to writing. So definitely better way is to ask them to say something instead of write something. Of course, it is not possible every time, but if we have a chance to to ask to complete the task in a spoken form, in oral form, it is definitely better to do it like that. Prepare a printout of homework. Usually, when we want some group of students to complete the task as a homework, we just say complete exercise 5 on page 7. But in case of dyslexic students, not only saying that is enough, we should also write it down. We may print some material with the homework, with the information about the homework, or write it down on a blackboard, or send that using the computer, whatever. But just the printed form, the written down form of information about homework is also advised. Do not ask them to copy text from a board or a book. It is complicated for them to write. So definitely better solution is to give a printout of something. We can suggest they highlight key areas and draw some pictures in the margin to represent the most important points so that they can use their own way of marking different parts, and we should allow them to do that. Accept homework created on a computer. I remember I told you when I was telling you about the boy who prepared the papers in written form, and I was just unable to read that finally we decided that he delivers his homework written on a computer, created on a computer. And that is a very good solution. Physical handwriting is a real torture for dyslexic people. And nowadays, there are so many programs and word processors that just make life of dyslexic people easier. So we should allow them to use spell checker and just to help in such a way with grammar, with punctuation. And as I said a few seconds before, for us, the most important should be the content of the homework and not the aesthetic way of preparing it. Discuss an activity to make sure it is understood. That is important. So in case of dyslexic people, the same as in case of Aspergers syndrome people, it is not enough just to say what we expect, to tell what the activity is, but we should make sure that the person understood that. So probably we should ask the person if he or she understood, if he or she needs some more information. So that is only the way to help them be able to complete the task at home if they were given as many hints as possible. Give the opportunity to answer questions orally. So that's what I've already said. Because dyslexic people have problems with writing, they may have all the knowledge we expect them to have, but when they start writing it down, it may occur to be problematic, and then as a consequence, we will give them a worse mark. But if they say the same to us, it may turn out that their knowledge is enough to be a good student. So give them the opportunity to answer questions orally. Make written material dyslexia friendly. So that's what we have already said. When we prepare our materials, when we make presentations and do any other things like that, we should try to make them dyslexia friendly. So try to use proper fonts, proper background, proper colors, etc. And of course, we as teachers should use and encourage our students to use useful strategies. There are quite a lot of them. So the examples of such strategies are mind maps, or spider diagrams, are using highlighter pens for key concepts. The student can use a ruler under a line of a text when reading, and that is quite helpful. So we should be open to, first of all, using the techniques and strategies and encouraging, showing some ways to cope with dyslexic problems. When talking about written communication, continuing the topic, we should remember that because our dyslexic students, they have problems with understanding instructions, well, as I said, we should give them both verbal and written one. We should try to help them with some assistive technology, which is easily available nowadays. We should try to give them hard copy resources on colored paper. That's what we said. We should highlight key points in documents. Even now, when I give some didactic materials to my dyslexic students, I know that some of them are dyslexic. I try to highlight on my own some key points, and only then I deliver the documents, and it is just easier to such students. We should give time to them to read and complete the task. They need more time to do that. So the problem is not only about making sure that they understood the task, but they also need more time to do it. Well, in Poland, it is quite typical that dyslexic students who are to write their final exams at the end of secondary schools, if they have special certificates confirming their dyslexia, they are given more time at the final exams to read and to complete all the tasks and have the same equal chances comparing to other students. We should use different formats to convey information. So that's more or less the same as the one about verbal and written instructions. Sometimes it may be helpful to record meetings and trainings, because then the person can listen once again to that. Doesn't have to concentrate on making notes, because it is a problem for them. And when the meeting is recorded, then at any time the person can just peacefully listen to that once again and try to learn it somehow and understand somehow. And we shouldn't ask such people to minute a meeting, so to make a report, a protocol of the meeting, because that is not the task for such a person. We should choose the one who doesn't suffer from dyslexia. When talking about verbal communication, it is really important to give our instructions slowly and clearly. So we should communicate slowly and clearly with dyslexic people. We should try to minimize the distractions, and we definitely should check understanding. So checking understanding is something that we really have to do. We should supply form information in more than one format, so that's what we said. We should encourage note-taking, but not the typical note-taking, but in a way of mind maps, as I said, of spider graphs, of in the way that is easy to perceive for the person. And as it was said, we should definitely offer to use the recorder if we are willing to have our speech recorded. When talking about computer work, it is also not complicated. Nowadays, we can quite easily change backgrounds of our screen, so we can choose the color of the screen. Probably some pictures, some photos are not a good solution in case of dyslexic people. So that should be one color of a screen, but definitely this color should be proper to some individual needs, should suit individual preferences of a person. So it's not that at the workplace we give the same background color on every computer, but we should try to respect individual preferences in that case. We can supply anti-glare screen filters on our computers, and the rule, which is quite easy to implement, we should make frequent breaks, and that is important hint for everybody, not only for dyslexic people. But frequent breaks, the possibility to stand up just to make a few steps is a good idea, just to have like 5, 10, 15 minutes of break. It will change the ability to focus, to concentrate on many things. Of course, we should also try to reduce distractions for focused tasks. So, for example, we should try to sit away from doors that open from time to time. We should avoid sitting close to some noisy machinery. We should avoid listening to the radio and all the things that may be distractors. We should ensure that work areas are organized, neat, and tidy, because it is just easier to find things. There are less distractors around, and it is easier to start the work. But it would be also important to just have a kind of agreement with the rest of our team, of our colleagues, that they return important items to the same place each time. So if we have some important books, some piles of documents, and we should try to have the same shelf for them or the same drawer for them, as to make it easier for a dyslexic person to find it, not to ask other people, but just to go and take it from the place it should be. And our workplace, our work area should be well lit. That is quite obvious, but not always it is as it should be. Of course, when talking about professional working places, usually it is well lit, but at home, it's not that often, and that is important. Light and proper lighting is sufficient in case of dyslexic people. When talking about ADHD hints, to be honest, the majority of them are similar to the ones for dyslexics. We should, in case of ADHD sufferers, we should try to divide their work into short time units. So once again, that's about breaks, and that's about dividing that in shorter time units. They are not able to concentrate for a long time. So one big task should be divided into smaller ones. So after completing, let's say, 5 smaller tasks, we can say that the whole one is finished. Many breaks. In case of dyslexic people, I said about 5, 10, 15-minute breaks every 1 hour. That is advisable. And the same about ADHD people. So many breaks in regular intervals. That is something crucial. Do physical exercises while working. That's something that we all should do, especially in case of online teaching and learning. But easy thing, and the one that probably many of us use, although we are not ADHD sufferers, is using different types of lists, plans, post-its to write down reminders, timetables. Sometimes it is just good to write down on a paper just what to do in which order. So we write down one activity and then another one. We can set some time for doing it. So all ways of planning our activity is advisable in case of ADHD sufferers. And the last group is Asperger's syndrome sufferers, so my favorite. And let's have a look at a short revision of their difficulties, and then I will give some suggestions. So we should remember that Asperger's may have difficulty with interpreting instructions. So they may not understand them as we expect them to. They may have difficulty in noisy situations, in unstructured situations, difficulty starting work and organizing the work, the tasks, difficulties with organizing themselves and their belongings, so the things they have with them. Difficulties with listening to multiple instructions, coping with changes, so if they need to change the room, the time, the workmates, the colleagues, that is a kind of real and serious problem for them. Difficulty with distractions, interpreting abstract instructions, focusing on the important part of instructions, and as we know, problems with motor skills. And what can we, as those who prepare the workplace, the communication, what we can do? So first of all, we should keep our instructions brief and precise. So the easiest possible way is to use simple and concrete language. We should use written instructions, so not only say, but write, and maybe written form is the best because we can just give that to a person or send it and everything is in writing. We should confirm that the person has understood our task, our instruction, and we can use the help of classmates, of other students, of workmates to provide some cues to a Asperger syndrome person. So keep instructions brief and precise. When talking about simple language, I also want to say that we shouldn't use metaphors. Our language should be plain. There should be no room to guess the meaning of what we want to say to the person. So simple language. The second rule is to give the person time to process the instruction. We should be sure that that the attention of the Asperger syndrome person was put on our instruction, and we also should give the time to absorb the meaning of that instruction. And as in the case of dyslexic people, it's good to ask if the instruction is understood, but maybe asking is not enough. Maybe we should just check it somehow if the person understood our instruction well. We should make use of visual cues and procedures, but only if it is practical. So not every Asperger person would like the visual cues, but some of them would. And then we can use a written schedule or task sheet in verbal instructions. We can use visual cues and instructions, color code to the instructions, so we can have some colors that mean this and that, and I can use the color code. We can allow the Aspergers to mark off each task as it is finished. So just have some signs, some motives that mean that the task is finished. We should point to the starting place, show an example of what we are requiring. So not only give the instruction, but also give some examples of that. And as in the case of both dyslexics and ADHD ones, we should break work into smaller steps. We should do the breaks. And it shouldn't be the big task to be completed in 2 days' time, but the big task should be divided into smaller steps. Because Asperger syndrome sufferers have communication problems, we can also try to deal with that sphere. Among communication problems, there are the ones that Aspergers may have a foreign or odd intonation. That's what we said. They may show concrete interpretation. They may show unusual linkage of thoughts. They may be confined to narrow topics of conversation, may feature learned phrases in particular situations. They may show misinterpretation of what was said, so they can understand us in a different way. They may often hear only the beginning or end of an instruction or our comment. It is important. So we may have an impression that the whole instruction was understood well, but they may hear only the beginning or end of that. They are not able to interpret the real meaning of colloquialisms, metaphors, similes, and sarcasm. And that is what was shown on the picture at the very beginning of Asperger syndrome part. So try to avoid that. That is our task. And finally, they may have feelings of inadequacy and isolation from peers, from colleagues, because they cannot understand what is happening. So how to deal with this group of problems? Definitely, we should try to use visual cues where possible, of course, if it suits the person. If we are joking, we should explain that to the Asperger. We should just say that we are joking. It shouldn't be taken literally. We should reassure that it is okay to be wrong and we should be supportive. So it is quite wise to tell the Asperger syndrome person that there is nothing wrong to make mistakes. And we should try to explain the proper solution, the proper way of completing the task or the exercise. As I said, we should keep our language simple and direct, so we should avoid metaphors, colloquialism, and all the language aspects that can be difficult for Asperger's to understand. We can try to talk through situations because then the example is given at the same time. And we cannot use sarcasm because it will not be understood. It will be taken literally, and we can get another result that we expect. And when talking about social skills, we should remember that Asperger's, they don't understand rules of social behavior. They may talk about inappropriate subjects. So in an inappropriate moment, they will start inappropriate topic. They lack empathy. They can be very outspoken and tactless. And that's not because they are rude, but that's because they are not familiar with social rules. They may develop a fixation on certain individuals. So that is not only on certain topics, but also on certain people. They may have a strong sense of justice, but see things in black and white terms. So it is somehow related to the problems with reaching compromise. But that is a very important thing to remember, that they have a strong sense of justice, but for them life is black and white. They may have difficulty making friends because they are not understood by other people. They may lack the idea of personal space, may misinterpret the behavior of peers, of colleagues, of other students, may dislike being touched, and that is quite often. They can appear naive and are vulnerable. They don't interpret body language or facial expressions. That's what we said, but this one is quite important because our communication is based on body language, is based on facial expressions, but for them, that is the language they just don't know. And they have poor conversation skills. They may have poor conversation skills. So what to do with that? Definitely, we should debrief situations by discussing what the person could have done. So when something happened, we should analyze it retrospectively, explaining what could have been done. We should encourage self-control by providing a timeout period. So definitely self-control is here very important. We should use written reminders to support proposed actions. And we should be very aware of how vulnerable the person may be to colleagues' pressure, to peer pressure, and being set up. So probably good solution is just to talk with the group of people, with the colleagues of the person, but still we should remember that some people don't really want to inform others about their deficits. But maybe in some situations it is just a good solution to tell about that and to prepare the group of peers, the group of colleagues to react in a proper way. But definitely, when talking about communication with individuals with Asperger's syndrome, it is obvious that these individuals, they need consistency, predictability, a calm and controlled supervisor, an organized workplace. And to be honest, I would say that these conclusions can be used in case of dyslexics and ADHD sufferers because they are just universal. Everybody works better in an organized workplace. If the life is predictable, it is just easier. So these are the rules, especially for Asperger's, but not only for them. Okay, and concluding, I promised to tell a few words about my research, which proves that the things that were said, especially about dyslexic students, are really true. And that if we wisely plan our materials, we can influence the results that are achieved by dyslexic students. So let's start from the very beginning. So my scientific interests at the university, they somehow combine with my didactic practice at school. In my institute, we do have a laboratory in which we have a specialized high technology equipment, and the equipment is called an eye tracker. So we have only one, but still good that we have at least one. An eye tracker is a device that enables a researcher to observe and analyze the way a subject looks at an object. So that means that using an eye tracker, we are able to see in detail what is at the center of someone's gaze. So While using an eye tracker, I can see if the person looked at a particular part of the material on the monitor or not, if looked, for how long, and I can try to draw some conclusions why the person looked there or why the person didn't look there. An eye tracker is the thing which you can see in the picture just below the computer screen. It is a video-based camera, and that camera is directed at the eyes of the person who sits in front of the computer. Of course, the material, in case of this type of eye tracker, the material must be displayed on the computer screen. And while completing the task by the person, the camera registers the eye movements. And when talking about eye movements, it should be said that there are two basic ones. They are called fixations and saccades. And in the second picture, you see the examples of both fixations and saccades. Fixations are the circles that you can see. Some of the circles there are big, some of the circles are small. Fixations are the movements of our eyes where the retina is stabilized over an object of interest, and the object of interest is stationary. In other words, if we look at something, if we focus our eyes on something, that is a fixation. If we do that for a short time, the circle that you can see is small, but there are also big circles, and that means that the person looked longer at that particular place. But there are also lines that join the circles. So the lines are called saccades, and these are the paths of moving our eyes from one point of fixation to another point of fixation. When talking about fixations, it should be said that eye movement is quite long because it takes from 200 to 300 milliseconds, so it lasts from 200 to 300 milliseconds. And because it is that long, during the fixation, the information is perceived. Saccade is much shorter. It lasts from 30 to 80 milliseconds, and it is too short to perceive information. That's why during a saccade, it is not possible to perceive information. Eye trackers are the devices that are used in many fields of human activity. For example, they are used on almost common basis in neuroscience, in sociology, psychology, medicine, industrial engineering, human activities, in sport, marketing, and advertising. And probably that is one of the most popular ways of using eye trackers because it is related to commercial aspects of that. If we check at which part of a bookshelf in a shop a person looks at, we can place our product there and have a bigger chance of selling our product. So that's why it is used for commercial reasons in marketing and advertising. They are used in computer science, in ergonomics and usability aspects. So what did I check? Well, as a teacher, I am somehow interested in school activity of students, and on the basis of my experience of working with English textbooks, I said at the beginning that I draw some conclusions and had some observations. And that's why I wanted to check what I can change in a textbook, in the material, to make the process of learning of dyslexic students easier and more efficient. And I prepared 3 different materials that were mirroring the real existing textbook of English. In my research, there was set number 1. So this is this one on the left upper hand side, the colorful one. This is an original textbook of English. I changed the text in here, but from the graphic point of view, from the point of view of layout, it shows the real existing textbook of English. What is important in here was the task. So the students were given the text that was divided into 4 paragraphs. As you can see, in every paragraph there was a photo. The photo was related to the content of the paragraph, but the students didn't really need the photo because all 4 photos were related to task number 1, and there was something to do with these pictures, but for some reason the pictures were placed in the text. My students were asked to read the text and to complete exercise number 2. That was a multiple choice task. So there were 5 sentences and 4 possible endings, A, B, C, and D. And after reading the text, I expected them to choose one proper answer. And there was also the second task, here number 3. They were to match the definitions of 5 words given in exercise number 3 with 5 words that were in the text, and the words were highlighted. So they are somewhere in the text, as you can see. In the material, so in set number 1, except for photos that were quite interesting for me, there were also 3 boxes. Here is box number 1, in which originally were listed some words taken from the text. So somebody chose 5 or 6 words in English and decided that they might be more difficult to understand, and for that reason wrote them down, but only in English. There, and as you can see, the distance between this box and the text is quite big. So it is not that obvious for a student to have a look in here to check the words because the distance is quite big. Definitely closer to the text was box number 2, which was not related directly to the task. There were some hints about completing multiple choice tasks, so some rules how to do that efficiently. But to be honest, it was not that necessary to read it to succeed in that exercise. And there was box number 3, which was just a separate exercise, spoken activity. For unknown to me reasons, it had some graphic composition and was placed in the right corner in here. And that was the original material that you could find in one of the textbooks. But on the basis of my experience with dyslexic students, I wanted to check what I can do, how I can change this material to make it more dyslexia friendly. So the very first thing I did was changing the colors in the material. And in both set 2, which is here, and set 3, which is at the bottom, you can see different sets of colors. That is more or less yellowish. And I also changed the position of photos. In set number 2, so in here, the photos are still in the material, so in the paragraphs of the text, in the same location. But in set number 3, there are no pictures in the text at all. All 4 pictures are in exercise number 1 in the left-hand corner, upper left-hand corner. So they are not in the text area. They are still there, but they don't disturb the person while reading. The most important difference was related to the boxes. So as you can see, in set 2 and set 3, I placed the box 1, so the one with the vocabulary, in a bit different place. Now it was definitely closer to the text area. And I also added Polish equivalents to the English words there. Why? Because if, as it was in set number 1, originally, if there were only English words, that meant that the dyslexic person, who wanted to check the meaning had to find the words, the explanation at the very end of the book, because usually there is kind of dictionary there. But it is, for a dyslexic person, it is somehow complicated activity to find it in the list of other words. Or the second option was to use the dictionary, paper one or online dictionary, and to check the meaning. Probably it would be paper one because they use textbooks during the lesson, and they are just forbidden to use mobile phones on the lesson. That is why I just added Polish equivalent to these words to make the life of dyslexic people easier. I also changed the size of the box explaining how to solve multiple tasks. It is still close to the text, but not that close. And I just deleted box number 3, so the one which is here with this oral activity. It is still there, but not as a box, just as exercise number 6 in here, and it's not graphically, well, it's not different from the rest of the task, it's the same. And just to sum up, you should remember for now that set number 1 is very colorful with the pictures in the text and 3 boxes in here. Set number 2 is changed when talking about colors, so it's definitely dyslexia friendly. Still, the photos are there in the text, but the boxes are a bit different. And set number 3 is different because the pictures are not in the text anymore. Of course, the text is the same in free materials, the tasks are the same in free materials. And let's have a look what happened. Of course, I analyzed many eye tracking metrics, but it is not that important now. I only want to show you the difference that occurred when talking about correctness of the answers. As I said, the students were to complete 2 tasks. So they could get 10 points for both tasks. I don't know why I didn't, I think I skipped the slide with the participants. That is quite important, so sorry for going back. I should say that there were 120 participants in my study. 60 were dyslexic and 60 were non-dyslexic. And I randomly divided them into 3 equal groups. So that means that there were 20 dyslexic and 20 non-dyslexic students working with set number 1, 20 dyslexic, 20 non-dyslexic working with set number 2, and 20 dyslexic and 20 non-dyslexic working with set number 3. And let's have a look at what happened. In case of set number 1, so the colorful one, 66% of correct answers were given by dyslexic students, and non-dyslexic ones were correct in case of 77.5% of their answers. So the difference is quite big, because it equals almost 11.5%. And you can see here that non-dyslexic students were more efficient, so their answers were definitely more correct. In set number 2, this one, so the yellowish one, with still the pictures in the text, it turned out that there is the difference, but this time these were dyslexics who got better answers, so whose number of correct answers was bigger. 69.5% of correct answers. In case of non-dyslexics, there was the change, so the decrease to 64%. So from the point of view of dyslexics, it is better because they improved their results. But here, from the point of view of non-dyslexics, the changes caused that their results were just worse. There was the decrease. But if we have a look at set number 3, which is the one with pictures just outside the text, you can see that we almost reached what we wanted to reach. Okay, still there is the decrease in case of non-dyslexics, because the percentage of correct answers equals 68.5, but we managed to increase the results of dyslexics and to make it almost the same as in case of non-dyslexics. That means that it really is important to pay attention to the colors, to the location of pictures, and just to the design of our materials. because we can somehow influence the way the material is, the information is perceived by our students. Of course, the results which are shown in here are not the best, because in case of non-dyslexics, we can still observe the decrease of their results. So we should continue the research and try to find the way of increasing the results of dyslexic students and not decreasing at the same time the ones of non-dyslexics. But still, what I want to show you here is that it really makes sense and it influences the way information is perceived. So what about eye tracking conclusions from my research? Definitely, I can say that on the basis of the eye tracking research on dyslexics and non-dyslexics, it seems obvious that the potential of any document, in my case it was a textbook, in your case it can be the material for students or a kind of document, the potential of it can be reduced or increased through specific graphic and editorial actions. The second conclusion says that the way pictures are set out in the material, as well as their number, are of significant importance, because although the removal of photos from the text reading area reduces the degree of visual attention that is paid on them, in the case of dyslexic subjects, graphic representations seem to increase the reception. And that's what was said somewhere in the first part of our meeting, that you should use illustrations in your materials, but illustrations should be placed in proper parts of the materials. So they shouldn't just break the text, they should somehow accompany the text in a proper place. Conclusion number 3 says that if pictures are located in the text that is to be read, for example, as in the case of my research, that was the paragraph of the text, they attract the attention of the reader. For dyslexic students, any additional and unnecessary activity of that type may result in inattention and distraction and missing the gist of the text that is being read. So from that point of view, it is better to rethink it twice, the location. As a consequence, this may influence the final results which are achieved by students, by readers of the text. If the photos are moved away from the text area, they do not distract the readers as much as if in the situation that they are in the text area. And this helps them complete the task without any significant distractors. What is more, the fact that the photos were only moved but not removed is important, because the document page is still enriched with illustrations, and that is in accordance with the hints. And that is advisable in case of dyslexic students, but the role of the pictures change, they are not distractors. The choice of color is also significant. We can see that excessive color and strong contrast are negatively evaluated by dyslexics and non-dyslexics. I also had the questionnaire in my studies, and I asked the students in the paper questionnaire what they thought about the colors of the materials, the sets. And it was quite surprising, because as you see, I used the yellowish color. And that is the color which is advised in the literature for dyslexics. But the dyslexic students very often wrote down in the questionnaire that they are used to white and black. So although the contrast which is given by white background and black letters is not advisable for dyslexics, because all the materials are printed like that, they are used to it. And for them, the yellow color which is advised was something strange and something unnatural. So probably Dyslexics also need some time to get used to that. I mean, you're dyslexic students, so maybe at the very beginning that will not treat that as something helpful, but we'll need some time just to get used to that. And the last conclusion says that the design of documents, of materials can be a help or a distractor. So we should try to plan in a wise way, because wise planning can stimulate the final results of dyslexic recipients. And in many situations, wise planning of the design may make them become as successful as non-dyslexic ones. Okay, and more or less that is what I wanted to tell you today about. So I used some sources, but maybe that's not the most important now. So the book and some web pages. Что, спасибо за внимание. Вот это все от меня. Если есть вопросы, пожалуйста. Если вопросов нет, тогда это все от меня.
Так, дуже дякую. Спасибо. Да. Уважаемые коллеги, у кого были вопросы? Я знаю, что вопросы и с самого начала были касательно аспектов, которые нам сегодня рассказывали. Действительно, их можно использовать не только при выкладании иностранных языков, но и в повседневной работе, так как использование цветов, акцентирование внимания на проблемах студентов или учащихся, это очень важно, потому что мы иногда упускаем вот эти вот тонкости, не обращаем на них внимания, и от этого страдает принятие информации, и не всегда даже, хочу сказать, студенты и учащиеся с какими-то образовательными потребностями, они признают, что у них есть такие потребности, да. А мы, как педагоги, мы должны это рассмотреть и вот использовать всевозможные методики для того, чтобы достучаться больше к ним и как можно больше информации, чтобы у них осталось, и они ее приняли, эту информацию. Да, действительно, это очень важный аспект, и я, допустим, не лингвист, юрист, но понимаю, что и использование цветовой гаммы при презентации, и блоковость, определенная блоковость играет очень большое значение, и я даже для себя теперь сделала выводы там, где у меня презентации были яркими, что я пыталась обратить внимание на то или иное событие, теперь я понимаю, что нужно немножечко пастельные тона использовать, потому что мы не знаем, когда большой поток, 100 человек в аудитории, ты читаешь лекцию, но ты же не можешь с каждым пообщаться и узнать, есть у них какие-то предрасположенности или нету. Наша задача совершенно в другом стоит. Поэтому действительно очень полезная и нужная информация. Пожалуйста, вопросы, если есть, можете задать их. Можно включить звук, можно с помощью чата. Совершенно не имеет значения. Презентационные и видеоматериалы все будут предоставлены, вы сможете с ними еще более детально ознакомиться, обязательно видео посмотрят, я думаю, все участники, потому что оно еще больше раскроет видимость проблемы, потому что мы не всегда видим эту проблему, которая может быть перед нами. Потому что, я говорю еще раз, не знаю, как в польском обществе, но в украинском обществе боятся признать о том, что есть проблема определенная у человека, потому что общество может не принять человека с данной проблемой.
Да, мне кажется, что это является самой главной проблемой. То есть в случае студентов Варшавского университета у нас есть специальное отделение, такое, которое занимается помощью, как бы поддержкой для таких студентов. Но даже они, то есть работники этого центра, они подчеркивают, что студенты – это взрослые люди, они довольно редко обращаются за помощью к ним. И вот Честно говоря, мне кажется, что только один раз ко мне подошел студент и сказал: